Hello, mortals. We are your Valkyries, Miss Darby
and Miss Charlie.
And we are two lusty, learned ladies from the dark beyond, here to enchant your mortal mind with our witchy wisdom.
Just like you nasty girl.
We will be discussing our experiences and opinions on sex work, art, and the erotic taboo counterculture we can't stop talking about. We are currently recording and transmitting this episode from our opulent spaceship of fiendish fun. Welcome to the Babes of Valhalla. Content may not be suitable if you are underage, closed-minded, or immature. We discuss topics that are graphic and sexual in nature.
Today we are discussing the book Witches, Sluts, Feminists, Conjuring the Sex Positive by author Kristen J. Sollee. Kristen teaches undergrad gender studies courses at the New York School and is the founder-editrix of Slutist, an award-winning sex-positive feminist website. She curates the annual Legacy of the Witch charity festival in Brooklyn, New York. You can find her on Instagram at Kristen Corvette or on her website, which is kristensollee.com, which we will put in the episode description. Today, we're going to be talking about the amazing book that Darby and I read.
Yes, this is a great book, and we loved it very much. So this book, Conjuring the Sex Positive, Witches, Sluts, Feminists, on the back, for a quick overview. Witch, slut, feminist. These contested identities are informing millennial women as they counter a torturous history of misogyny with empowerment. This innovative primer highlights sexual liberation as it traces the lineage of witch feminism, juxtaposing scholarly research on the demonization of women and female sexuality that has continued since the witch hunts of the early modern era, with pop occulture analyses and interviews with activists, artists, scholars, and practitioners of witchcraft. This book greatly enriches our current conversations about reproductive rights, sexual pleasure, queer identity, pornography, sex work, and more.
Yeah.
Yes. And if you've listened to any of our other episodes, you would know that we would, of course, totally be into this. Another really cool thing is the illustrator that me and Charlie loved. Mm-hmm. So, Charlie, why don't you tell them about Coz Conover?
This book has, I don't know, somewhere between 5 to 10 illustrations in it, which are absolutely fantastic. The artist is named Coz Conover, and you can find them at Instagram at CozCon or on Etsy. If you look up CozCon on Etsy, you can find them as well, and we will also put all of their information in our episode notes. But Anthony Coz Conover, or CozCon, is a Black queer artist who forces us to face some of society's harshest realities through fashion illustration. He features Black femme bodies in the recreations of prominent couture designs and his own iterations of popular ready-to-wear looks. Apart from his artwork being fashion-centric, he uses his illustrations as an outlet to talk about injustices that go on within the industry and injustices that directly affect people of color. These qualities through the lens of a Black creator presents us with a point of view that we are thirsty for. And there is also an article about CozCon, Darby, that you found?
Yeah, so that little blurb is, so CozCon does not have a website as far as we could find. So this is like his little blurb about him section in his article that he did with Garage, which I believe is part of Vice. So if you look on garage.vice.com, you can find the article with CozCon in it, and where they interview CozCon, and we also will put that in our episode notes as well.
And I feel like you can definitely tell that he does fashion illustrations because all of the clothes in this are amazing, and I wish I owned every piece in this book. They're so beautiful and witchy and macabre and perfect.
Yeah, I mean, and the clothes and the outfits, like every character is so stylized that when I read that, it's like, oh, Fashion Illustrator, yeah, that makes complete sense, because they take really special care kind of getting everything in a very particular way. I mean, just yeah. And you can immediately, I feel like, tell their style.
Well, this book has so many points, like so many amazing sections. Kristen has broken it up into chapters, and each chapter kind of focuses on a different subsection, an intersection between the identity of witch, slut, and feminist in just a really beautiful way. And I think Darby and I had a really hard time finding a way to talk about this book without just like reading through it. So we've decided to pick out some little thoughts we found interesting and elaborate on them with our own ideas. So, Darby, did you want to start off with...
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. Yes, and we pretty much highlighted probably the entire book. So this was difficult. It's definitely worth reading. Okay, so I decided one of my sections was the chapter The Spell of Seduction, Sex Work, and the Sacred Whore. So in this section, Kristen kind of is talking about sex work as a taboo female power, taking control of it, learning how to wield it, and this idea that there are women in the industry who choose to do sex work who kind of view it as part of, as kind of being part of a healing, or being like part of like the practice of healing. So specifically, the quote on page 93, "At the nexus of the witch and the slut identities is sex work. Some women who choose to work in the sex industry as strippers, porn performers, dominatrixes, see their practice as part of a lineage of healers tapping into taboo female power." And I love that quote, because I definitely did not expect that when I started doing sex work, was to have those types of experiences. But I think that when you're young, you don't, and a woman as well, I don't think that we always understand or recognize that touch, sexual acceptance, and kind of feeling desired are really healing and kind of needed things for human beings. And there are a lot of people that don't get to feel that way. And I generally primarily work with men as a stripper. So I think that what I kind of realized was that after a certain point as a man, if you don't have family, children, or if you're not married, or even if you are married, you don't really experience touch as often, because men don't really hug each other. They don't cuddle each other. They can't just be touchy-feely with one another or with women, right? And women, we're constantly being touched. We're constantly annoyed by being touched. But we also can, I think, more easily access it, at least as an able-bodied woman. So, you and I, Charlie, like when we hang out in person, we hold hands and we snuggle and we hug all the time. And I think that sometimes you can take it for granted. I think especially with COVID, people might be more realizing this, that how often are you really hugged as an adult if you're not in a sexual relationship? And as a man, how you're probably even less. And then beyond that, there's sexual acceptance and the feeling of being desired. And how many times have we given a lap dance to somebody who's like, I really want to say this or do this, whether it's, foot fetish stuff, or it's some other sort of, play or fetish or kink or whatever, that they can't express or don't feel comfortable expressing that with their partners. There's been so many experiences where doing sex work, I find that men want to confess something to me because they can't tell it to their wife. Or they just want to sit there and they just want you to hug them. And they just want to feel close to somebody. And there's so many times where there's been, men, not even, I think stereotypically people think like, oh, you're just giving lap dances to like grody old men. And that's not at all the case. There's so many times when it's a young man and he talks to me about how dating's really hard, or his girlfriend just broke up with him, or this and this and this happened. And he just wants to sit there with me on his lap and like put his head against my chest and just hug me and have me hug him back. And there is something that does feel like it's healing work in that sense. Of course, there's people who just want to try to use your, butt as a like masturbation
tool. Too, yeah.
Yeah, those people don't feel. I'm not healing them, but
well, you might be. You might be healing them too. I mean, they're probably very lonely. Therefore, that's why they're using your ass to help them get off.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, I don't know. I think there is something to be said, and I really connected with that idea. And I also loved. She talked about the idea of the sacred whore, and that there was these, priestesses. I think it was. Oh, I have it right here. Uniting the spiritual and the sexual like no other historical figure is the sacred whore. Such women were priestesses in places like ancient Mesopotamia, Greece, India, who served as living expressions of the goddess of love over whose temples they presided. Through sexual congress with these women, worshippers could reach higher states of religious connection. And that's page 95. I don't know. I like that idea of kind of being this goddess. And I do feel that when you enter the club, we've talked about this before, it kind of feels like an altered reality where the tables do feel turned, where instead of, as a woman, walking around being hesitant or fearful of men, I feel very in control. I feel very powerful. I do feel generally like I'm being worshipped, and it feels good. And I like this idea that kind of this like sexual encounter is kind of bringing people to this higher state of religious connection. So,
and I feel like they also said something about the people who ran a lot of the temples were often thought of as virgins, but they were actually pure. Like they just dedicated themselves to their work. And so the purity of their dedication got translated into virginity, when that's actually not always what it's thought to have meant. And so it's like they are in these temples and these places just dedicating themselves to their art and their craft and their dedication, which could have been, intimacy and love and sexuality in the name of these goddesses. And that could be the way that they're pure. They're like purely channeling, Yeah,
but I love that because that kind of goes to maybe this is, for all the Catholics out there, I apologize, but, the Mother Mary, how she's kind of this never-ending virgin. And there's this idea that even like forever and ever, she was always a virgin. It didn't matter. Even she had other children with Joseph. Wow, it's been a long time. She's had other children with Joseph, but she was still like a perma-virgin. Perma-virg. Oh, man. That's so good. But, I don't know. But you're right. I mean, she was completely dedicated to being the mother of Christ, right? So this idea of purity and purity being defined different ways. I mean, we could totally get into like the virginity conversation, but no, I love that idea.
Yeah, I love that idea too, and I completely identify with sex work as healing. And I think stripping's such an interesting one because as you go, I feel like for me, when I listen to interviews with dominatrixes, so much of what they do feels like that connection is so obvious, right? The people coming in have this need, and it's an emotional need as much as a physical need. And sometimes it can be harder to see the connection with stripping, but as a dancer, it's so apparent because so much of the time you're spending working with somebody's emotional state on top of their physical state, at the top of their sexual state, and it all ends up getting blended into this one entity that you're trying to interact with, and you're trying to comfort.
Yeah, and you're kind of creating you're shifting reality and kind of creating this space that can only exist in this one place or this one moment. And there is one more really good quote that kind of speaks to that.
Oh, yes.
To produce an altered state of consciousness through raising and releasing primal desires is to be versed in the art of shifting reality and perception, weaving a spell of seduction, like any spell requires, an intimacy with the physical and metaphysical realm.
Ooh.
Ugh,
yes.
So good.
Yes. How can all sex workers not be witches?
100%.
Yes.
100%. Because even on your worst night, even when you're so grumpy, even with the person that you're sitting there and you're just like bouncing on them because that's what they want, and there's like, you feel like there's no art involved in that interaction, they're still totally under your spell because you're just existing within their grasp, kind of. I don't know.
You're exuding, and I think, like an aura that they are drawn into.
They're just eating it up. And I do feel like a lot of men, women have this kind of secret sexual power that I don't think that, at least I didn't realize how much of it I had until I started participating in sex work.
Completely.
But and I don't know what it's like to be a man. Don't get me wrong. I have no idea. Don't ever want to know. But I imagine that they drive around or walk around and they see all of these beautiful women, or just women in general, that they don't have access to because they're, one, afraid of us, which we'll get to later, and two, I don't know if there's a two. I think they are, they want to possess, and they're also fearful of us. And doing sex work, it is kind of like you're the goddess, coming down from up above and becoming more accessible. And I think that's, whether it's because you're younger than them, or they find you very attractive, or you're kind of very open sexually, or they are viewing you that way. I mean, I would never act the way that I act the first time I meet somebody at a strip club. The way I would never act that way on a first date.
No.
Yeah. But in the club, those doors are completely open, and it's this kind of magical, weird, in-between world.
Well, you're also approaching everybody like you've known them, forever. And there's no boundaries. There's no, you're not holding yourself back at all. You're going straight from stranger to, comfort. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to build this world of comfort that they can settle into, instead of that awkwardness associated with a real person, which is getting to know them. Maybe they won't like what you like. Maybe, you guys will get into an awkward conversation, or you won't know where to go. Our job is to make sure that doesn't exist. You're there to be comfortable. You're there not to worry about that kind of thing, that you can just kind of let loose. And that environment, that steamy, sexy environment, is meant to facilitate that.
Yeah, that's true. And then we can sing the song, Getting to Know You.
Yeah, because that reminds me of a strip club.
Hell yeah. But it's like the dubstep remix.
I'm going to go and talk about Witchcraft on Screen, Living Deliciously. Which, have you seen The Witch?
No, I haven't seen The Witch, and I have to watch The Witch, and I have to watch The Love Witch, because they both
I do
really
too.
Cool.
I haven't seen The Love Witch.
We should watch The Love Witch, and then we should put it on the podcast.
Then we can do a little episode about it. That's a great idea. Talk about sex magic right there.
Oh, and then we could talk about sex magic.
Yes, which I would love to talk about.
Okay, cool.
But anyway, living deliciously is taken from the witch, which is such a great line, because at one point Satan says, "Don't you want to live deliciously?" And the answer is yes, of course I do. But in this section, it talked about the representation of witches on the big screen, which is such an interesting conversation. And there's so many things that I hadn't really thought about until I read this book. It shows how the witch was first only ever portrayed as an evil character. And it wasn't until The Wizard of Oz where Glinda, the good witch, was the first representation of a witch that wasn't evil. And I just thought that was amazing. I had never quite made that connection in my brain before. But then this dichotomy of, are you a good witch? Are you a bad witch? And how that relates to sex work. You know, are you a good slut? Are you a bad slut?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get into all that in a second. But first, I wanted to jump into a part of this section that I found so interesting. And in the book, Kristen starts to talk about one of the most problematic witches in modern filmmaking, and that is Nancy from The Craft. And I love The Craft. Do you love The Craft, Darby?
Mm-hmm. Of course. How do you not love The Craft?
I love The Craft. So good. But they talk about how this movie starts out with these group of women. If you haven't seen The Craft, I'm sorry if I give away any spoilers. It came out in like the 80s, so you should have seen it already. It's a really good, cheesy witch movie, which means it's probably like my favorite movie ever. But it's a group of young women who are all outcasts. They're depressed or abused. They have social anxiety. They deal with bullying. And they band together as a coven to find a personal power. And I think that is fantastic. Like, this movie starts off really strong, where all of these women are creating this power together, and it doesn't really matter what's happening in their personal high school lives because they now have found each other. But Nancy, who is kind of like the most kind of gothic, dark, brooding, unstable one of the group, starts to turn from the light side to the dark side. And as she does, the coven starts to turn against itself. And this represents how this power is too great for these young women to hold, and how once they band together as a group of strong individual females, they start to fall apart. And there's this amazing scene that I absolutely love when Nancy's kind of going off the deep end, and she's yelling at this man for being a horrible, terrible human being because she hates men. And she is coming towards him, and as she does, she starts to levitate, and she's just sliding on the tips of her like pointy-toed black boots and just like going crazy. And as like a teenager, the first time I saw this scene, I was in love. Like, I thought Nancy was the coolest person in the entire world. And
oh yeah,
it wasn't until I read this book that I was like, oh my God, that's such an issue. Like, it's showing how, unfortunately, you know, Nancy can't handle herself. Nancy can't handle this power, and that when women are given all this power as a group, they fall apart. Kristen also talks about this kind of, where she says that so many of these evil witches, as a child, she looked up to them, and it wasn't until older that she was like, oh, they're evil, you're not supposed to like them. And I felt like that was my moment reading this book, being like, oh yeah, Nancy's evil, you're not supposed to like her.
But how? I don't know. I liked her though too.
I love her, she's so great. But that was not the intention when she was written. She's not supposed to be the good guy.
Well, I don't think that she's good, but I still liked her. But when I read this part in Kristen's book as well, I also felt like, oh shit, I can totally see how like this representation of witches is negative.
Yeah, which just relates to like groups of women in general who are empowered women. and that they can't, once they gain a certain amount of power, it becomes too unstable and they can't control it. Like, they can't handle it.
I mean, that's why we can't have a woman president, Charlie, didn't you know? She
Right.
would just get too emotional.
Her period would get in the way. We'd have a war like for a week every month.
That wandering uterus. My
Yeah.
God.
Which there's also a really great chapter on in this book as well. You guys should really read this. But
Yeah.
I guess to continue with this thought is that I just found it so interesting that we start to kind of identify, like, even within the craft, like, who's the good witch and who's the bad witch. She has, like, an abusive father. She lives in, like, this trailer with her mom, and you can tell that they don't have a lot of money, that they're facing a lot of issues. They definitely are the most impoverished, the ones that are facing the most difficulty in the show. And yet she's the one who also ends up losing control and having, like, the worst outcome. Like, all the other girls just continue through high school and she gets committed to an insane asylum. What? That's insane. She's in high school. Oh, well, some of these witches were bad, but they weren't as bad as her. You're seeing them as individuals and then, like, judging them against each other.
Yeah, and comparing them.
Yeah. This reminds me this discussion that Tina Horn just recently released maybe like a month ago, on the horarchy, and this idea that depending on where you work in the sex industry depends on how, like, good or bad of a slut you are. Kind of. That's kind of the concept. And when I was thinking about this good witch or bad witch, it really reminded me of that. Like, looking down at somebody because they do, like, full service, or like, oh no, I'm a good kind of stripper, I don't do these things, or like, oh but I might be doing these things, but I'm not as bad as her. And that idea that instead of looking at sex workers as a unit, that they can be broken down when judged individually against each other in this hierarchical state, when that doesn't do anything positive for anyone. Just the same way as, like, judging these witches against each other is not empowering them as a group. It's only dragging everyone down.
Well, I think I think that happens time and time again, right? Like, even with feminism, it's like there's a lot of feminism, swerfs, who are sex work exclusionary. So we want rights for all women, but not for those women. Or they don't care about,
Right.
Women of color or trans women or, women with disabilities. So it's the idea that, well, if we're all women, then that's all that should matter. If we're all sex workers, that's all that should matter. Because so many people have been talking about, whorephobia in strip clubs. And it's true. I definitely know that, when I started stripping, I had that feeling. I was like, well, I'm stripping. I'm not doing this. And I probably at the beginning would have felt some type of way about being lumped in with sex work. Whereas after getting educated on kind of what that means and learning more about it and learning and connecting with women who were doing full service, who were doing other things, it wasn't so much as, looking down on them as much as it was kind of looking inside of yourself and saying, okay, why do I feel the need to raise myself higher or feel better than, or feel like, well, at least I'm not doing that. It's like, where's that coming from? It's coming from, the internalized misogyny that we all have that's telling us,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when you are a group that is targeted and that there is a lot of aggression and anger and misrepresentation, one way that we get swept in to that mindset is instead of banding together, you end up splitting apart and trying to separate yourself from that group as a way to save yourself from the criticism.
Yeah, which doesn't end up doing anybody any good, because we should be banded together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
you have a section on witchcraft on screens as well.
I did. Okay, so I liked this idea of expressions of the monstrous feminine, reflecting the male anxieties about the female body. And this is it was kind of talking about this movie, The Love Witch, which I have not seen, regrettably, but is on our list now to watch. And she said something, she said that exact thing, that the monstrous feminine reflecting male anxieties about the female body. And that so resonated with me because I feel like time and time again, men are afraid of our bodies and yet they want to possess them. And they're grossed out. Men are just grossed out by so many things that happen that are completely natural. So but you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, how much anxiety do I have about my own body because of the anxieties that men have about my body? So, up until recently, if I was dating somebody, I would just hide the fact as much as I possibly could that, like, I had a period because I didn't want to talk about it because I was so embarrassing. And I'd make up, like, little words like, oh, it's like my girl time or whatever, to try to make it, like, sound cuter than, like, the barrage of, like, blood that was leaking out of my body. And then, body hair, like, heaven forbid a guy ever found out that women, like, can grow, and a lot of us do grow, like, little hairs on our nipples. Like, heaven forbid that sometimes we have to, we shave our upper lips, or we are doing tons of things to kind of maintain this aesthetic, and we can't talk about it. But guys can kind of be gross and hairy, and we just sort of deal because it's guys. I mean, I remember getting I would get so anxious on dates that if we went out to eat dinner, that I was so worried I would fart, or if I had to, not had to, but if I was staying over at somebody's house, like, heaven forbid, I just wouldn't poop in their house because I didn't want them to know that I poop. Yeah. So, but I feel like, men are afraid, they are grossed out, or they don't want to talk about these things that happen with us that are natural, that happen to everyone on the planet, so 50% at least of the population. And I actually there was a customer that is a great customer of mine, very respectful, very awesome, but totally fits this mold. And we had this conversation once where he literally said to me, my wife is too real. Like, she shits and farts and eats, and I don't really want to see any of that. So I come here to spend time with someone who appears to be perfect.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And we got into it, because I'm thinking, well, is your wife just, like, pooping on the floor in the living room? Is she just farting in public all the time? Like, is she being rude? Yeah. And it wasn't even about that. He just, he didn't, he lived with her. They shared space together. And so her being comfortable and maybe not, like, pooping when he's out of town, I guess. I mean, she just
saves it all up for the weekend trips when he's gone.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't want to deal with it. That grossed him out. And I couldn't believe it.
That is insane. You know what this reminds me of is, did you ever see at least the first episode of The Marvelous Miss Maisel?
Oh, yeah. Oh my God. I love that show. How she puts her makeup on in the morning?
Yes. In The Marvelous Miss Maisel, she goes to sleep just looking like she has all of her makeup on, her hair is done, and she lays in bed like she's gonna go to sleep. The second he falls asleep, she gets up, goes to the bathroom, she, like, washes her hair, she takes off her makeup, she puts on, like, a face mask, gets in bed, then wakes up in the morning before he wakes up, goes back in, fixes her hair, fixes her makeup, and goes and lays down and, like, wakes up just like, oh yes, I just woke up like this, and he's none the wiser. And that is, like, the expectation of, like, what women should look like this perfect doll from, like, the 1950s that is so unrealistic, and just decides to ignore the fact that women are human beings. And the great part of that show is when she breaks up with her husband, she starts to realize, like, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. Like, I can just go to sleep and wake up, and then, you know, I can just be myself. I don't have to put on this act.
Yep. Yeah.
That is ridiculous.
100%.
Oh my God.
But I feel like we all, maybe not to that extreme,
Yes.
but a lot of us do the same thing. Like, I know whenever I date somebody in the beginning and, you know, I'm on my period and they want to have sex and we have to have that conversation, it makes me nervous because if they are super grossed out by it, like, oh yeah, no, ugh, it's gross, you know, gag, then I feel weird about it. But
yeah, and even if you're a confident person, like, oh, I'm on my period, whatever, you still have, there's still like this moment where you're waiting to see how they react, because that also says a lot about them. You're like, okay, are you going to be cool with it, or are you going to be weird about it? And what does that say about you as a person? You know? Exactly.
And I personally am not one to want to have sex when I'm on my period, because I think it's I think it's God's gift that I get a week off. So
yeah, but you also don't want to hear somebody react like,
exactly.
Oh, you disgusting creature. Like, how could you
how dare you
put yourself in front of me? Why aren't you hiding?
Yeah, why? Like, we know when they used to send women away, like, well, you're...
Yeah, like the red tent.
Yeah, you just need to go and deal with that, have a break.
Still, in media, that idea of using your period as an excuse to not talk to men is huge still today. Like, that trope of being like, oh, I have to go somewhere, and the guy's like, oh, where are you going to go? Like, if it's your professor, and you're like, to the bathroom, and he's like, you just went to the bathroom. Oh, I'm on my period. And they're like, oh God, I can't even talk to you about that. That's so disgusting. Like, please just go. Get out of my sight, you bleeding human.
Wasn't that in the movie Clueless? Right? She's like, I'm surfing the crimson tide or whatever.
Oh, they do it all the time. I feel like that always happens with boyfriends, with husbands, with coworkers and bosses and teachers. Like, it's endless. Like, that use of an excuse. You did the Two Girls, One Movie with Showgirls, and they do that in Showgirls.
Yep.
She uses the same excuse. I was just on my period. That's why I didn't come to work.
Yep, 100%. And in the sex scene, the almost sex scene, when she's like, I'm on my period, and he puts his fingers down, no, you're lying, and then he pulls his fingers out, and it's bloody, and he's like, ugh, and then they don't have sex.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay. I mean, like, I know that everyone feels differently about it, so it's to each their own. But the fact that...
Yeah, but you don't have to use it as a point of shame.
Yes, exactly, 100%. And I also feel that women tend to do sexual things with their partners when their partners are not in the most pristine condition. Whereas...
when they're smelly.
Yeah, you know, they just go back from the gym or they're at work all day and we're still sucking your dick. But if you want a guy to go down on you, I feel that more often than not, it tends to be, oh, why don't you go take a shower, or, you know, this or that. And then it just feels weird.
Well, I also have that internalized now,
yes,
where I do get anxiety still about, like, oh, well, maybe I should shower, maybe I should do this, because, I mean, I'm very comfortable with my partner. We poop in front of each other, but there's still
they poop
those
on
anxieties.
each other. No, I'm just kidding.
We all the time, but that's different.
Well, and I think there's just not enough communication in, I would say, I believe personally, there's not enough communication in heterosexual relationships, because it's kind of, you know, it's been happening and been considered quote unquote normal for so long that I don't think that people feel the need to talk about it. Whereas I think in non-heterosexual relationships, there's so many more options and ways of having sex. Not that those options don't exist, obviously, for heterosexual couples, but I just don't think it's normalized as much. That there's just naturally more conversation. And that's coming from, of course, the opinion of a heterosexual person. I just know that my friends that are in homosexual relationships, I'm super jealous of the amount of communication that they have regarding that. And I'm not saying that's the case for everyone, but it just seems to just be there's just more options, and there has to be more conversations. And I don't know. It's just,
That's interesting because I was talking to a friend of mine who is in. They are a queer person, and they're in a lot of different types of queer relationships, a lot of different bodies, a lot of different types of sexualities and like gender identifications. And I was actually talking to them about this very thing, about communication, and they said, there's so little like groundwork for how you're supposed to be in a queer relationship that the only way that we can figure it out is with like such, like blatant communication and exploration. Because we're trying to figure out how to be with each other because there's no guidebook.
Like a record, like how we see heteronormative sex everywhere.
Exactly. So I didn't see an example of like how to be in this type of relationship. So we have to make it up. And then I'm learning from each relationship I'm in. But each new person that I'm in a relationship with, I also understand that their body is different. The way they identify with their body is different, which is a true thing with hetero people as well. Like each person identifies with their body differently, but we stick each other into these boxes where my friend was saying that, we constantly are so communicative because we need to figure out how to connect in a way that we were never taught how to connect. Which reminds me of what you're saying with your friends and their communication versus a lot of heterosexual communication.
Yeah, no, definitely. And my quote for this little section that I really liked from the movie The Love Witch is, "The whole history of witchcraft is interwoven with the fear of female sexuality. They burned us at the stake because they feared the erotic feelings we elicited in them." Yes. And I
just like the Crucible.
Just like the Crucible, yes. And also, it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So if you are attractive, men want to possess you and are afraid of you. If you are, unattractive, they're afraid of you and want to possess you. I mean, it doesn't matter. Either way, men are just pussies. That's not the wrong word. I don't know. What's a good word for a weak man except for not using the word pussies or bitch? What's a good word for that?
Weenie.
Meanie? Weenie. Perfect.
Weenie.
Men are weenies. That's what we're trying to get at here. Accept us and our periods.
In the book, it actually talks a lot about that, about how kind of like the two archetypes are like the young, lustful, beautiful maiden, or like the old, ugly, outcasted hag. Crone, yeah. And both are equally dangerous. Yeah. So pretty much anyone is evil, because if you're beautiful, then you're trying to seduce, and if you're not considered beautiful by your community, then you're like evil hag in your hut trying to cast spells on everyone and give everybody a miscarriage. So,
Yeah, if you're not able to birth children.
Yes, then you're also evil.
You're just, she used the great word. She used the word fecund. Ugh, I love that word.
Oh, yeah. You know what? There were so many words I highlighted in this book that I had never heard of before, which maybe is sad to admit. But, I was actually really happy. I would write little notes all over this book.
I would say that this book also is not a hard read.
No.
Because there are some books about, feminism and or sex work that sometimes can be good books, but they're not enjoyable.
They're like academic.
Yes, and this book is a great intersection of, it's academic, but it's also really easy to read, easy to digest, and just, if you looked at both of our books, I think probably they look the same. I probably have like every 4 pages, the corner is turned down as, oh, this is great, I love this part, and just highlighted and written everywhere, and it's a great book. So
yeah, no, I think this is also really nice because you don't have to be into witchcraft, you don't have to have experience in sex work. It's really a look at women throughout history and the ways they have been prosecuted. And so it looks at those words that have been used and those titles and how women have fought back using those titles throughout history. So, I mean, I think it's just a great feminist piece in general. And you don't have to have a connection to the identity of a witch or a slut to really find the value of what she writes about. All right, should I go into my next section? Oh my gosh, I have so much to say about this next one that I'm going to try not to talk too much just because there's a lot of good sections, but this one was something that I am personally so invested in. So I'm going to try not to be on my little soapbox, so I'm real sorry. So this section is called Hexcell Feminism, Capitalism, and the Witch. So good. Okay, here we go. So, I'm going to start with a quote, which is, "The witch is the embodiment of a world of female subjects that capitalism had to destroy." This is a quote by Silvia Federici on page 132, and I just thought this was such a great way to start this. It looks at capitalism in this very mass-produced, over-controlled way that our world has slowly evolved into, and how this idea of feminism and women's rights and a witch as a rebellious woman is the antithesis of that idea, and how so much of women's rights and body rights and capitalism are in conflict with each other. If you look at like the sex worker movement and how many people are speaking out for sex worker rights and how this idea has become so popular within our community, there's a lot of people who are wearing shirts by, let's say, Jack the Stripper, right? She's a very popular person in our community who makes clothes that a lot of people wear. Things that say like tip her, or different like slogans that are all about sex worker rights. You know, someone I know is a sex worker. I love a sex worker. Claiming your identity, openly supporting the identity of others. And something very interesting that this book talks about is that when a movement becomes big, one way of bringing it down, instead of like just squashing it the way that we would think of squashing a movement, which is putting out like counter points to it, like most capitalist things, they latch on and they start creating the product. And they find a way to commodify the rebellion and a way to reproduce it, because they see like a common thread that is marketable. And just like how we have to be so careful as people within a community of like who we're supporting and how we're supporting a concept, and how it can so easily be taken out of context. And I mean, this can be seen in so many ways. If you're looking at shirts that are sold on some website that says, you know, like, I believe in feminism, and all the shirts are made in China and the workers are paid cents to create it.
Those workers and usually are women.
Are you really contributing to feminism and a way that a capitalistic, you know, society, a sexist capitalistic society can kind of squash these rebellions is by taking money away from the people who are making genuine products with genuine attempts to spread alternative ideology. It's easy for them, instead of squash it, to redirect the ideas and the funding and the flow of money from that cause back into this like capitalistic whirlwind.
I actually have a great example of this. So what you're talking about is buying power. And women actually have the most buying power. I mean, like we have over half of the buying power, because women control the majority of the household income. Whether or not you work or not, you generally are spending the most money. And your money, better than anything, votes for you. So where you spend your money is also where you're putting your votes. And if you're choosing to support industries or companies or individuals who don't align themselves with your ideals, or who use slave labor essentially to make their products, well, then you're supporting them. They're getting bigger. They're making more money. They're making more products. those kind of poisonous methods are, continuing and getting bigger. So I actually did some copywriting work for this guy who I didn't realize until recently actually was doing this. He was a very nice person. I don't think he probably even realizes it, to be honest. But he makes his money by finding like hot topics, like things that are kind of going on. And he makes t-shirts and he sells them on his website and on Amazon and stuff like that. And he sells hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of t-shirts a day. And he takes things basically from other people, from not independent artists, because it's all quotes, but they'll be, and it can be anything. So he has everything from, Hillary Clinton supporters to Trump supporters, everything in between, from feminists to anti-feminists, right? It's not about the message. Right. It's about making money. So whatever's going to sell, he's going to sell it. So he has an entire line of feminist clothing. And it's just things that have feminist quotes. They say things like feminist on them, or, what was the one? It was, fuck you, pay me, stuff like that. Just things that were trending, essentially. And people who are maybe, okay, so like me, I might look online and say, oh, I love this t-shirt that so-and-so has, an influencer that I like, or a celebrity, and then I go online and I'm looking for it, and up pops his version of it, which is close to the original and a lot cheaper. And I'll probably buy it, right? What I don't know is that, where's he making his t-shirts? What is his company supporting? Who is this person? Where's that money going to, right? And that's where the breakdown happens, is now I'm not saying that this particular person is evil, but that's what capitalism is doing. So Jack the stripper, who is an independent artist, creates something beautiful. And this guy over here says, oh, hey, this woman is making these awesome things that people are buying. I'm going to take this quote, put it in a similar font, make it pink, just like she did, and I'm going to sell it on my website for $6.
And I feel like when that happens, it reduces the power that a movement is gaining through supporting artists of that community.
Totally, because you're not supporting sex workers. You could be wearing a shirt that is about sex work and wearing it and walking around with it. Sure, maybe you're building awareness, but that $10 or $15 or $20 didn't go to a sex worker. It went to a guy who doesn't give a shit about sex work. And what are you doing when you're buying clothing from companies that are stealing independent artists' designs off of Instagram and Facebook and repurposing them and reselling them? You're not supporting the individual. You're supporting a giant faceless company who does not care.
Absolutely. And there's such this connection. There's actually this quote that says, the garment industry overseas are not only human rights issue, but a feminist issue tied into capitalism, sex work, and sexual autonomy. And that's so true. There's such this connection in other countries between the garment industry, the sex work industry, how these women are able to interact with their coworkers, with their management, how they're supporting themselves, if they are supporting themselves with sex work outside of the garment industry. This book has an interesting point at maybe they're actually safer in sex work than they are in the garment industry, or maybe they're supplementing their income because they just don't make enough from the work that they're doing within garment work, which is also true. I did a documentary a couple of years ago about the garment industry, and a lot of the women who worked in the factories were also involved in sex work and also dealing with a lot of issues from their upper management all at the same time, while also trying to juggle living off of minimum wage. And not that we have to go too much more into this, but I think it's always important as a consumer to be conscious. Like, if you're gonna go out there, like, support your sisters, like, support the people who are making it happen, who are pushing and who are fighting to create a community with their artwork, with their voices, with their bodies, you know, because they're trying to build something authentic and beautiful and build awareness, or just build a community, or make art, or, you know, do whatever. And it can be very easy to not be aware, or choose to be unaware of that side of the industry that's just very easily taking that narrative for themselves and co-opting it. That's all I have to say on that. Sorry, I felt like that was all over the place.
Well, it's wonderful.
I just get excited and get explosive. When you talk, it's so well thought out, and when I talk, it's just like blah, 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 blah.
I don't think that's true at all.
Well, thank you. So this is only the end of part 1. Tune in next week to hear part 2. We just had too many good, juicy things to say. We couldn't cut it. So I hope you guys will love our second half of our dive into this book.
In the meantime, to soothe your aching loins, you can find us on Instagram at Babes of Valhalla. If you would like to email us or record an anecdote for an upcoming episode, check out our social media for the themes we are currently researching, and send your comments and stories to babesofvalhalla@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
Until next time, stay witchy and nasty.
Babes of Valhalla is written and produced by the Babes of Valhalla, otherwise known as your illustrious lieges, Darby and Charlie. Music provided by the musical genius, Gemini Genesis. And then we can sing the song, Getting to Know You.
Yeah, because that reminds me of a strip club.
Hell yeah.
Getting to know all about you.
But it's like the dubstep remix.
Getting to know, getting to know you.
Yes, see, you're so good at dubstep remixing.
Oh, thank you. It's my secret second calling.
It is so good.